The main thing about today is we've got 90 minutes to have a wonderful conversation. And that's really what particularly this meeting is about, that we can all converse and there are no rules. So today is as much as contributing as it is to listening. And I hope that all of us together are going to produce something meaningful at the end. The theme, as you know, is about values in public life. I'm just doing a really short introduction. And I suppose that the question is, you can look at this as with many things on a sort of small or micro or a macro level. So one of the things perhaps to consider as we go through is, where are you looking? Are you looking at standards of behavior on your local train or your local bus? Or are you looking at the standards of public figures like the politicians who are in charge of many aspects of our lives? So I think that's one aspect, is who is displaying these values, and really where do we see them most frequently? Because that could lead into what you can do about it. I suppose the other question, just in this short introduction, is who's judging? Are you judging? Are you judging based on a set of principles you've always had faith in? So I think that's the other issue that I would say, to think about the hilltop you stand on, to perhaps remind yourself or become more familiarized with the judgment place that you do. The format today, Charles, first of all, is going to be talking about what has changed in behaviors of public life and why. He'll be followed by Alan, who's going to be looking at the impact of those changing values on society. And then I'll be doing the third bit, which is what we can do about it. And finally, that will lead to takeaways. And the most important takeaway will be, okay, we've had a great conversation now. What happens? So without further ado, can I hand you over to Charles?
Thanks very much indeed, Neil. Yeah, I'm not going to talk for very long because, as Neil said, the emphasis is really on having a conversation and hearing all sorts of different views and takes on the subject matter. We've been having a crack at this actually for a little while. We had a go at values in public life, really focusing around the post office scandal a year ago sometime. And you use that as a sort of starting point for talking about values in public life. I guess the assumption we've got really is that values in public life haven't improved and have gone quite in the opposite direction. I mean, that's of course open to debate. If anyone wants to argue that they have improved, and there may be areas where they have, I'm not totally sure. But we don't want to preclude any views here. So the first question we want to look at is have they changed? Have values in public life changed? So by public life, we really just mean in the common take on that term, which is people in the public eye, politicians, government officials who have some sort of public visibility, media, and other sort of leading figures in society who are public figures. So that would include, I guess, some figures from business and opinion formers, whatever you like. So it's really all of those, and we can form our own definitions. So what I'd like to do is to just start off with the question: have values changed in public life? Without wishing to overwhelm you with data or anything. I just want to show a few studies that have been done very recently in the last year on that, in case we want to pursue let's just see if I can share the screen. Can everyone see the screen? Okay. If you can see it, then these are really the points. I don't need to belabor them, but one of the particular bits of research that's been running for 20 years is the Edelman Trust Barometer, which I'm not showing here simply because I've talked about it so many times. and I just felt it was better to talk about something else. But the Edelman Trust Barometer has shown that in this country and actually in other countries, pretty much all around the world, trust in politicians, trust in governments, and trust in media have consistently gone down. There's been a bit of leveling out in the last year or two, but nothing very significant, no rebound. So on a 20-year view or 24-year view, which is, I think, the amount of time the Edelman survey has been going on, trust has gone down, and which is, I guess, quite a good proxy for looking at whether standards in public life, values in public life have declined or not. Certainly, it's a good proxy for our perception, at the very least, of whether that's happened or not. So it seems that we've got to the point where, according to a recent study from Henley Business School, only 9% of us trust politicians to tell the truth. I mean, that on its own, maybe not a startling finding, but it's pretty appalling. 45% of us almost never trust governments or any party to put the country needs before their own. Obviously, slightly different question being put there. 80% of us feel politicians don't understand our lives. So there's a dislocation, a feeling of disconnection rather from between ourselves and those that apparently run the country, and then people believe that political donors are pulling the strings, big business audiences, and so on. So there's all that general feeling of distrust for politicians, and there is also a feeling of distrust for the media. And I haven't really laboured the point by putting too much in there, but there's a recent survey of World Values, the World Values Survey, which, as most of you will know, is done by a worldwide group of academics. It's a comparative survey that looks at all the countries around the world. And they have found that only 30% of us have confidence in the British press, us being the British public, and the UK actually ranks pretty badly on that. So it may be, leave it to you, but it may be that we do feel that as a public, as a society, maybe us individually too, that standards in public behaviour have gone down. And then just one more quick slide before we stop sharing and have a general conversation. The other part of that question is, well, why has that happened? So I'm just throwing out a few possibilities here. I mean, I've got an even longer list if you're interested, but it's not, I don't really want to give somebody else's views. I just want to give a little bit of a prompt here. So some of the things when Alan and Neil and I were discussing all this, as we have done, sort of we returned to the subject over the last months and even the last year or more. These are the sort of things that come up. Is it because that we're now more focused on our rights rather than our responsibilities? We've forgotten the other bit of that deal. You have rights, but you also have responsibilities towards other people, society in general. Maybe an emphasis on performance rather than values. Is it to do with the rise of individualism and maybe a less emphasis on the common good, consumerism, short-termism, social media, of course, and the dominance that social media has, which might account for the decline that we seem to have seen even over the last 20 or 30 years. The concept of Margaret Hefferner's concept of willful blindness. Are we turning a blind eye deliberately to things that go wrong? Are politicians and others in the public eye turning a blind eye to things that are obviously wrong, unjust, and against you would have thought their values? Or is it, maybe other things too? And just sort of final comment really is that it's actually 30 years pretty much since the Nolan Committee, which was set up by John Major in 1994 to look into, do you remember all the stuff to do with cash for questions? And they set up the Nolan Committee and they drew up standards in public life. And those standards were selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, honesty, and leadership. And those are the principles that should underpin public life. I mention them only because that's one yardstick we could use in looking at the whole question of what should be the standards of all of us in all of us in society, but particularly those who hold leading positions, our politicians, media, and all the rest. So that's really the question. So the question is, what's changed really, and why? So open it up. Any thoughts from anyone really on that? Yeah, Chris.
I've got a gut reaction, and I was looking at willful blindness, and I sort of tweaked it and said a form of willful blindness is fatigue with ambiguity. What I mean is that there's not one truth anymore. Like logically, there's not one truth. And people say, oh, this is the right thing, but you know it's more nuanced. And it makes it harder to judge things because there's a whole spectrum of meaning and distrust. So there's a part of that willful blindness is distrust. Anyway, that's my ramble.
So people distrust. Are you saying people distrust simplicity, simple answers, or are you saying the opposite?
There's an element. There's a fatigue element where people have tried to give simple answers for things, and it's more and more clear that that's not right. And then that leads to people saying more and more extreme things to like move the needle because people are complacent. So you have to like become more Jerry Springer, you know. And so you've got people becoming more and more extreme at a time when it's more clear that that doesn't work, and that just turns people off. Something like that.
I think there's obviously a lot of that going on.
So were you saying that the truth doesn't land anymore in the way that it did?
Maybe I have trouble judging the way it did before, but I think because there's so much open debate and polarization. I think it's hard to just trust anything anymore. So it's very tangled up. But yeah, I think that's in the direction.
Okay. Chris, to building up, well, not really building on your point. It's probably it's not a disagreement, but I think it is probably a counter view. So you were saying about simple answers don't work or simple positions don't work. I'm thinking of a large number on the side of a bus, and I'm thinking of a message saying immigrants are stealing your jobs, resulting in Brexit.
No one believed that. No one believed it, but people wanted to believe it, or they just tuned out.
Always been people purveying simple answers, haven't there, to complicated questions. Is it? I mean, it's hard to say whether that's more prevalent now than before, but maybe the ability of media to broadcast, publicize those simple answers is greater than it was. I mean, this is the great discovery made by any conversation that mentions Nazis probably needs to watch itself. But this is Hitler's great discovery, wasn't it? Or Stalin's great discovery. You could the big lie. You just used in those days the press, radio, to broadcast a totally false position, a false reading of what most people regard as a truth, and repeated often enough, people started to take it on board and at least pretend they believed it. And after a while, maybe they even did believe it. And that's the sort of basis for a lot of totalitarian states, isn't it, in the way that they keep control of the narrative.
Yes, I have one example of that. I remember going to Rwanda to run a living values training, and it was exactly 10 years after the genocide. And you could still feel the heaviness of the atmosphere. And I heard so many stories about how local radio had been involved in just constantly shouting out that the Tutsis are cockroaches. Kafar was the word. They're cockroaches. They've got this awful word. And it just spread throughout the society until people just went crazy and started hacking each other's heads off, etc. And that was largely just the influence of the radio. Quite incredible. People who had lived together in harmony for so many years suddenly became total enemies. And what I'm noticing in Jersey at the moment, we've just had an election of our government here about a week ago. And there's a lot of stuff going online, which didn't even happen at the previous election 4 years ago. And a lot of people are coming online with anonymous labels. And they're coming on and they feel they can just say anything they like, because in a small island, everyone knows everyone. So out they come, and the hatred and the anger and the emotions that come up and the slanging that's been happening has been absolutely dreadful. So, yes, I think social media has got a very large role to play in this. Of course, it was radio in the past, but now social media within the general public is playing quite a large role in influencing people. That's just a feeling that I'm getting.
That's rather depressing, isn't it?
Yes, I'm sorry to put that depressing.
Okay.
Especially in our little sunshine island of Jersey. Well, I mean, I hope that there'll be a healing process from this, and the new government will go ahead strongly. But it has been quite depressing, actually, and many people have mentioned that.
Yeah. But it sounds as though Jersey sort of lagged the rest of the rest of the world in a way, or certainly the UK, where I'm never quite sure how to refer. I always get it wrong, referring to Jersey in terms of the rest of the country. But the UK, where we've got, I think, had that for quite a long time, haven't we? Really, since social media really emerged, we've had that getting stronger and stronger. That sort of people feeling that they're entitled to, say the most awful things and unsubstantial things, because there's a certain anonymity granted by social media, or there appears to be anyway. That's what people feel. They can get away with it. They're not talking to their neighbour. They're not talking to a colleague. They're not talking to a member of the family. They're just going out there, and it's going to people they don't really know, so they feel free to just really let rip.
Yeah.
I just think it's been happening for quite a long time. I think you've been safe or insulated from it, which is great, but it's coming to you as well, sadly.
Just to counter that, I'll try and be the BBC here and put another view on it just to balance it.
Do they do that?
I think that's next month's kind of meetup call, isn't it? I know. We'll talk about that. What I am starting to hear more about, or more openly about, like you see, that point that Helen and Charles made about people think they can just post anything and it doesn't matter. It does matter in a legal context, and it matters in a legal context under employment law, under your duty of care to an employer. And I am starting to hear more now, or more loudly, about particularly larger employers saying, we fired this person because they posted something on social media, which we find is, they don't use the word abhorrent, but not in line with what we want our company to be associated with. And then I hear about it because all these people start campaigns. Oh, we shouldn't have been fired. It was unfair to fire us. But actually, there's a bit of leadership, I think, we're seeing from larger employers who are saying, we do not want to be associated with this. We're not going to take a big public stand. We're not going to slap it all over the side of our fleets of electric vans, whatever it is. But if we discover people are posting stuff and they're in our employment, that is grounds for disciplinary action, which it is. And it's that point of everyone's going, well, I've got a right to do this. It doesn't matter. I'm starting to see encouraging signs that backlash is starting to come to say it does matter, and it always has. We've just been too scared to exercise the levers we've got to challenge it and to report it and escalate it. So hopefully that can start to, again, these things take time to shift, but there are kind of green shoots that hopefully, just like your plant pot, Helen, it's got lots of lovely green shoots in it. It kind of gives us hope for the future.
So do you think that's linked to the fact that employers are flexing their muscles to get people back into the office as well?
No. if I'm honest. What I'm kind of picking up through some of the stuff and the feeds, so the other bodies I'm part of, the labour force survey data sets that I subscribe to and all the rest, I think that era of companies going, we want everyone back in the office, that push is subsiding now. Because employers have realised, you know what, actually, and if anything, what's coming back is a push for the 4-day working week. Again, that conversation is coming back round again. I think this is, some employers starting to say, if we are not careful, if we show that we have employees who are exercising hate crimes, what they're posting on social media, and we do nothing, then we as a corporation or we as a company are legally liable for that. And we don't want to get tarred with that brush. We don't want to have to pay those fines or deal with those prosecutions, because that's going to affect our ability to win contracts and raise future investment. So there's a business case for it. I don't mind that. They've found the rationale they need to start to do that. And I always kind of say, so whenever I kind of get these emails going, reinstate so-and-so who's fired for posting an innocent, it's like, no post on social media is ever innocent. You make a deliberate, you can't just accidentally post something. It's a deliberate choice. And we're being called to be more accountable. How many values have I reeled off there in the last 2 sentences quite cleverly? Alan, get your values deck out. We can kind of see if we can do a full deck by the end of the time we finish.
In a way, we get, Chris.
Brief comment on that is, for one, I'm an actuary. I'm subject to professionalism, and it's sort of, I'm always being watched in a way in terms of what I say, would it reflect on my profession, and I signed a contract to do that. But just this morning, I read a Medium article on Ford Motor Company, and Henry Ford used to have spies go around and spy on his employees to see that they were living wholesome lives. And when I first listened to this, I was thinking, oh, well, we don't want to go back to the Henry Ford days, but there is an element of holding people accountable at some level. And maybe there is a contract that people have to agree first before you can do things like that. So I support the idea of having consequences for people who go over the line, but you need to be clear on what the lines are.
David.
Yes, building on that, obviously, and it was mentioned by Helen earlier about anonymity. And, a lot of the things said would not be said to a person in person. Yeah. And also if they knew who they were that were saying it. So I think the social media has got a big issue, not just in terms of the truthfulness of content put out, but also around this anonymity thing. And I think that needs to be addressed in some way, because that, ultimately the people that are spreading hate, mistruths, are all hiding behind a reality, and they're saying a lot of things they would never say to a person in person, and also they would be then held accountable for. And again, that links to the conversation earlier. If people are on LinkedIn, they're using the proper name, then the companies will take issue with things that they are saying that are they would not recognise positively against their brand. But obviously a lot of people in other type forms of social media are just using anonymity deliberately to say what they like, where they like, to who they like, with no consequence, or very difficult to make those consequences stick. So that was just building on the thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a very good comment, David. I think social media has got a lot to, if we're looking at the why, social media, and then the other side of that coin, I guess, is social media is accelerating that the disintegration, I guess, of that feeling of communities generally. It's created new communities, but as we all know, those communities quite often are little echo chambers. They're little bubbles, but the destruction of old communities, traditional communities, which human beings have lived in the last few, goodness knows how many thousands of years. We've been in communities, initially tribes, and as we developed into more stable communities, geographically stable communities. So that community feeling, which humans have had for the whole of our history, really, is disintegrating quite rapidly in the modern world. And is that really, if we're looking at the why, just to go back to that, because I think when we start looking at the impact on society and then on what we can do about it, it's good to have some grasp over, what are the reasons, and that they're obviously numerous, but maybe what are some of the main reasons? And that whole this hasn't started with social media, I would say, because just the Nolan Committee that was set up in response, that was pre-social media and set up in response to casual questions. That was MPs behaving badly, people in public life behaving really badly, even well before social media. And we can look at lots of other examples of that. It's not just particularly that particular government, the major government. It's been all governments, as we know, who will start out saying we're going to be whiter than white, we're going to do things differently. Major himself said we're going to have whatever it was that his cry was, which was all to do with morality and so on. And they all get sort of hoisted on their own petard. So disintegration of communities, I'd say, is maybe one big cause. I mean, we're running a little bit towards the end of our first segment, but Alan, do you want to add to that? You were putting up your hand a moment ago.
Yeah, well, it's a couple of points on the social media topic, and then a question, I guess. One is I heard somebody quite some time ago now, but he put forward that if people were not able to be anonymous, that would do a lot to sort social media out. And I remember hearing it and thinking that is so simple and it would be so effective. So that's one. Going back to what Helen was saying about the election, it feels to me that social media, when it's kind of general and just out there and people are saying what they want, it's kind of not so painful or maybe dangerous. But when you start to turn it into a pressure cooker with an event or a topic, then that's where we see real danger and hatred and all of the rest of it come out. And then the final one linked to social media is, I guess, have things really changed over time? Or is there just more transparency and more visibility and greater awareness?
I think the answer to that probably yes, both, isn't it? I think personally, I'd say that it has been a decline over time, but that is partly linked to greater transparency, which is, in principle, a good thing. But it also has a byproduct, which is it makes transparency and instant communication is quite a dangerous mix too.
I'm thinking, I had a conversation with my father about sort of the early Trump, and he kind of said, this was early in the days, that he wasn't so against him because he thinks all politicians are like that. You could just see it in him in front of you, which I thought was overly cynical. And he has changed his view now. But I can see that people do become cynical. And I think that's maybe part of this is cynicism that has become more normal.
And I think just to respond before you, David, just respond to what Aaron's saying, what you're saying, Chris. There are good aspects, absolutely, aren't there, to this greater transparency, and they're good aspects. I mean, one of the things that people suggest is that this sometimes vitriol, this uncivil discourse we have over social media and elsewhere, it does have origins too in not just the dismemberment of local community feelings, but also a dismemberment of traditional social structures, and that's it is both good and bad. I mean, it's that element of deference that used to be the case to people in position of power is no longer there, and that has its bad aspects, no doubt, but actually in many ways it's a good thing. We don't automatically feel that our elders and betters know best and we should jolly well do what we're told. We don't feel necessarily that prime ministers or ministers or people in public life are immune from criticism, and maybe maybe we never have, but there was that feeling of deference as well that we had. So it's not bad, clearly. Or our parents certainly did, and grandparents and great-grand and so on. And so I think you could argue that maybe there's a potential for maybe this is just growing pains that we're having. We've been unused to having this measure of transparency suddenly, the sudden availability of every bit of information you could possibly want you find out instantly if someone's done something tricky or wrong, or what somebody has said, in some obscure place in the world. Instantly, the whole world knows about it potentially. And maybe we just need to find a way to come to terms with that, come to grips with that, look at the positive side of that, and really try and do something about the negative. It all comes back to ourselves, I guess. Sorry, other people were wanting to talk. Sorry about that. David and Alan, I think, both wanting to say something.
I was just going to mention that one of the things that restricts our ability to apply values, because we're born with good values and develop those, but obviously things like driving individualism can move us in the wrong direction, which obviously there's been a pronounced move to do. But one of the things that fundamentally stops us from a neuroscience point of view is from being able to think straight and to apply our values properly for both others, people and planet, and go beyond self, is if we're focused on survival. And there's a deliberate move by many to move people into an anger, distress state, which we know the brain can't think straight, so we'll only move into survival mode. And likewise, if you're not anger and distress, and entering that survival mode, then we'll distract you. And obviously social media is doing both of those. It's trying to whip up anger. We're trying to create distress to lock people in that survival system, which means people can't go beyond self. They've not got the brain doesn't give people the capacity. The capacity is there in the right hand side of the brain. I'm referring to people like Dr. Emma Gilchrist's work, who I'm a good fan of. If you're the world on the right hand side of the brain is where all our values and connectedness to others and to planet lives. But if you are moving people into this distress state through a number of mechanisms, you can only enter a dysfunctional place. And that dysfunctional place can be very difficult and just focus people down on self. They can't go beyond that because they're in survival mode. And saying if they're not and then distracted, that's further a problem. And obviously, Dr. McGilchrist refers to almost now with the dysfunctional focus on money. And the inequality in money is driving people into those distresses. Social media is providing the comparisons to people to think, oh, I haven't got as much as everybody else, so my life's bad. So again, that can drive them into a different place. But that's sort of the neuroscience positions. We can't enter this world where we can truly apply our values if we're being driven into those spaces. And people in power and the social media systems are deliberately driving that, because they know that by doing that, they can divide and stop people from coming together and applying their values.
So we've got a different perspective here, which is, we're looking at what big tech you're thinking of and so on. Yeah. Okay. So that may be one of the underlying causes as well. So we'll add that to the mix as we go on through this conversation. And Chris is agreeing, obviously. What's that emoji thing going up there, Chris? It looks like ice cream cones. Not quite sure. But yeah, it's okay. Shall we move on, Alan? Because we really probably need to move on to the second part of this discussion at the moment, because a lot of these things will come back, and we'll be talking, again, revisiting these threads. But we've looked at are things declining in terms of public values in public life, and looked at some of the reasons why they might be declining. Alan, are we ready to start looking at the impact on society? I think we've got a bit there.
Yes, so let's just have a think now about, okay, so those changes, whatever they are, what's the impact on society as a result of those changes? And I'm not going to spend very long at all talking, because I'd much rather listen to you. But I have got a slide that Charles is going to share with just a few prompts, just to give us something to work with to begin. And here they are. I've tried to keep a balanced view. So rather than suggest that the impact on society because of the changes has all been bad, and I don't believe that it is, here are some of the things that I think might come to mind. Maybe not. There might be other things as well, of course. But in my experience, yes, there is a degree of polarization that wasn't there before. Perhaps in some places there is greater diversity than there was before. There seems to be a sense of entitlement growing in certain areas, and maybe combined with that, this sense of mistrust. But then, as we've touched on, people seem to have more of a voice now. Whether it's listened to or lands anywhere of any value is another question. And that's linked to individualism. And we touched on whether individualism has gone too far and to the detriment of a sense of community. People seem to be encouraged with a lot of the systems and structures that we put in place to think of their own personal gain and their own personal achievement rather than being part of something bigger than them. Is that good, or is it not good, or is it somewhere in between, or is it both? We've certainly seen from some reports a growth in inequality, but is that balanced by greater transparency? It used to be perhaps that it was easier to hide things away and not have things talked about if you didn't want it to be talked about, whereas now the truth often gets out, and sometimes very fast. And when that happens, people are at risk. And that's a function of the connectivity that we have. And we keep coming back to things connected to social media. So for the next 20 minutes or so, the question is, these changes that we've perceived to whatever degree, what has been the material impact on society?
Can I stop sharing that, Alan?
Yeah, maybe leave it for 30 seconds or so people can just take it in, maybe take any notes if they want to, and then we can hear, and like you say, it can go off.
I feel that that's very useful, that what you've put up in front of us, because you've highlighted, well, is this positive? And perhaps that's not so good, but what about that? That can lead to something positive, and this and that. And there's quite a lot of factors that you've highlighted there. And my immediate thought was, well, at least people are sort of more aware of what's going on in the world. And I've often heard this word awake, people are awakening to things that perhaps, many years ago, when all they had was the BBC in front of them and they just didn't know what other people's opinions were, they were, sort of rather ignorant to all of these dynamics. So I appreciate the way you've showed balance in those different aspects.
David.
Yeah. I'm not sure whether it perfectly fits in, but the things that are coming into my mind is obviously, this, how is it bringing community together? And, and obviously one of the things that I really do see is complete sensory overload, and also through that overload and distraction, then we often have a little bit more of a shallowness in terms of investigating the truth, and and a shallowness in connecting and talking to others. We're more on our phones rather than going out there and convening and talking to people like we're doing today, although we're using it in a good way. If we were local, we would be in a room talking about this rather than obviously on a system to do it. But I'm just concerned particularly about just the volume of overload, which is creating a distraction and a very shallow perspective. We don't dive into things quickly. We're quickly distracted on something else. And that allows the media to rely on soundbite, performative media, because they know the soundbite people will pick up, but nobody will go and read the detail. And, I'm just recalling in England, they said, oh, we're removing the cap between energy and gas prices. And, people say, oh, that's fantastic. That was a headline. But when actually even people, who are very into that, read the detail of what they were doing, they found out you're not doing that at all. But most people, 95% of the people will read the soundbite title, but nobody's got the time to dig into the detail, which allows people to tell mistruths. And so again, that just the sensory overload, the fact we're always being distracted by something else means we're not digging, and the problem is people need to dig deep to find the truth. But people are spending less time to do that, unless people are inclined to do it as well, which means the media and the barons are getting away with murder. They're saying anything they want, knowing people will just read the soundbite, even though the complete opposite's true. And I find what really funny is how you've got True Social when it's a system that ultimately, in my belief, probably says anything but the truth. But, but because it's called True Social, people think, oh, maybe that's where the truth is. And so, but again, there's a lot of that going on. People are using soundbite messaging to hide what really is going on, and that is not good for values. So I'm not sure it steers it in a slightly different way, Alan, but that was just what came to mind when you said.
Yeah, I think you raised an important point, a really important point. So there are two aspects to what you just touched on. One is the volume of information that we don't have to deal with, but is there to be dealt with. And then the other is the perception of speed of the environment around us being so much more dynamic than perhaps it was before. And the resultant tendency that we tend not to take the time that we could choose to take because we're fearful of either missing out on something or not being fast enough, and then putting on social media that I'm having a great life instead of being honest with your friend face to face. And so there's something about the superficiality and the speed and the volume becoming a bit of an overwhelm. And just to finish off, I read an article the other day that talked about how we constantly fill that downtime now. So, if you're bored waiting for the kettle, we're now scrolling, and we're not having that time for our brain to have, like what it was saying is that when we've got that downtime, our brain uses it to have a bit of a clear up. And we don't give our brain time for a clear up anymore. And so we've got a room that is a mess.
But doesn't this come down to the various studies that they're doing on happiness? Isn't that the driver? And I'm not an expert on all of the happiness studies, but if that's heading in a particular direction, that people are less content and less happy, then surely that drives a lot of human behavior. And it's interesting about connectivity, that there are fantastic advantages to it. But going back to the point David was making about the thinness of that community, if you wake up in your house and you're feeling unwell, you could well need the support of an immediate neighbor. If your car breaks down, it's the same thing. Well, there's no point going online and saying, guys, I need some help. What you really need to do is to have strong, rich, and deep connections with your immediate community. And I do agree that that is something that is being diluted. And I think that then comes back to happiness. And I think that then comes back to the fact that sometimes we ask ourselves the same questions again and again and again and again. I do a lot of work with people who are 28 to 30, trying to help them get better jobs with more meaning and purpose. And they are always after something that is 100% fit. And we always begin conversations with them saying, well, I'm not prepared to compromise on this and this. By the end of the sessions, what normally happens is you've got to fit around 65 to 70%, and everything is fine. And so I do feel happiness is a key here. I think the questions we ask ourselves need to be changed. I think the same questions are just on repeat. And I think the important research that really needs to be done here is to try to look at how happiness and contentment are defined, and to use that, if the methodology is robust, to inform some of the decisions we can take going forward.
Yeah. And Adrian, to save your fingers, do you want to share some of what you put in the chat?
It's just so I've just put another one in as well, about dogs. No, so it's just kind of picking up, Alan, that question, what's the impact on society been? And I was struck recently, there's a few things I've been reading, hearing about some of the kind of the think tank type places starting to say over the last 20 years, our pace as a society we're not where we should be in terms of art, culture, technology, infrastructure, all the rest. And if you look back over the last century, we were on a kind of a growth trajectory of lots of things. And all of a sudden, the last 20 years, they've all, even accounting for global pandemics and all the rest. And there's the question of what have we reached peak humanness and all the rest. And actually, part of this, I was thinking, links back to this idea of trust and that your point about fragmentation and overwhelm. We have so much fragmentation and overwhelm in media and other things. We don't know who to trust, and we don't feel we can trust the traditional, that point we're making earlier about, deference, doffy cap to the landlord. Because we haven't got that trust in an authority in the way that we used to, then we can't collectively kind of go, okay, well, we trust this vision for our country. Labour's about to rip itself apart again, and in the process, Manchester's going to burn. I'm pretty sure in the next few years, we're going to see Manchester riots because of what Burnham's doing in ignoring Manchester now and running to become PM. But that's October's values meetup theme, probably. But the sense of we don't feel we can trust stuff, so we're trying to make it up ourselves, that postmodern truth. Well, this is my truth, I don't care what yours is. So we haven't got enough shared overlap that says we all agree building this cathedral to St. Paul would be a brilliant idea. So we can create these kind of artifacts, these monuments that can unite us all collectively, because none of us have enough trust in single institutions anymore to cut through that distraction and noise to allow us to keep moving forwards. That's maybe where it's at. The cost is we've stalled as a society.
You're making me think also, sorry, Chris, go ahead.
I'll throw in, one theme I'm hearing is that sort of emotionality is growing, and that's sort of disadvantaging our ability to be rational. And I think that's a very rich area to think about, is how do you understand that, diffuse that? Because if you're all wound up, you're just never going to get it right. And if people get smarter and smarter at winding you up, there might even be a technology argument where the technology of winding people up is more advanced than it's ever been.
Yeah.
Stop there.
And actually, Chris, that I can support what you just said, because in the values economy book, it talks about how around about 75% of our decisions were based on rationale about 30 years ago. And then in research that was done around 10 years ago, it had flipped completely in that 80% of our decisions were based on emotion / our values. Now that on the face of it is a good thing, unless you add in the piece that you did about the manipulation. And then the other thing, Adrian, what you were talking about made me think about the importance, strength, and power of relationships. Because Neil, your example about the car breakdown, social media would say to you, we've identified a connection of yours within 1 mile, and so you're able to ask them to help you. But what it doesn't do is have any idea about the strength of relationship that you have with them, that you might have with your next door neighbor who you did a favor for last week and da da da. So it made me think that in society, what's kind of reduced and is much needed is infrastructure to encourage and inspire and catalyze relationships between people.
I agree.
Something I've noticed going back to, social media and people all coming together is that I've often seen if someone has an accident, a lot of people come in and say, I hope you're well, and how are you? And I do find that, the sort of natural tendency of humanity to care for each other can also come through these social media interactions. And it's very heartwarming, and it makes you realize, well, our true nature is this goodness. And then somehow all of this other stuff comes in when we are pushed someone said, when we're put into a stress situation, then the anger comes and we're out of control. But this basic human love and compassion is very deep and is there, and I think we need to hold on to that. It gives us hope.
And stop technology companies and all of those trying to destroy, because I think there's already experts who will be doing exactly that as well, trying to destroy these ability to create these bonds, because it's not in their interests.
Yeah.
And just like we have the best experts working out how to create an addiction to these things, I think we've got the same people to explore in that area as well. How do we create division? How do we stop building up people that connect with each other properly and effectively? Because if that is done, it stops people coming together effectively, and it stops people power really building based on good values. And and they know ultimately people power is powerful. So they really, really want to stop that from happening. So they want to stop people connecting properly, connecting and agreeing on the 80% and driving division over the 10%, and also distracting people as well. So, and it's interesting, money plays a big game in all of this. Again, it's interesting. I mean, again, just quoting Dr. McGilchrist, it's almost, money's become the new God, so, and that's a challenge, because if that's becoming the new God, where has values and ethics gone? And obviously he's already flagging the alarm, as a number of neuroscientists are, that our brain is shutting down, and part of that is driven by two things, is what I'll just quote McGilchrist here, money and technology in collaboration with each other to drive a future which isn't a great future of people that want to build on their good ethics and values and build a community focused on people and planet. So they do not want that. So the technology and the powers and the use of money are being driven to try and do whatever they can to stop that, through, again, putting people into anger states, fear states, and also into distraction. If that doesn't work, distract them, whether it's through football or social media, get them just addicted to it all. And it's not an accident, it's a deliberate neuroscience, and they'll have neuroscientists to understand exactly how to do that, and they'll be put into best use. So we need to be clever on how we use that to counter it, if that makes sense, because they're very well organized and doing this very, very well. We've got to become organized and work out how we can do the counter to that very, very effectively.
David, there's a question for me that is, are things really very much different then? Because I can't tell you when in time this was specifically, but I remember reading a quote from the Roman Empire saying, give the peasants just enough food and entertainment and we'll be fine.
Yes.
And just to finish off maybe this session, Charles, are we up for time just about? Helen, you're talking about social media and sharing very personal events. I came across a post on LinkedIn that affected me last week that I'll just share quickly with you, because I think it is relevant here. It touches on social media and AI. So I saw a post by a guy, it was a video of a guy building a shelter in the street for stray cats. And it was kind of on fast forward. So you saw him making the construction, the cats arriving, going on different shelves, on different levels on this structure. And in the post, it said, what a great guy. And I remember thinking, hat off to you, my friend. That's a really cool thing to do. Very generous of you to use your time and skills like that. Then I started to read the comments, and a comment said, nice AI video. And when I read that, I felt totally conned. And it just changed my demeanor completely. And then it was, well, if you can't believe that those things are true, where are we? I mean, this is what a place to be.
Yeah.
And so I haven't got a point to make. I just wanted to share the experience.
I think it is a huge point, actually, because it points to our propensity towards cynicism. And I think, we all know we've got these inbuilt negativity biases and all this stuff from our, days on the savannah where we, fight or flight, and the flight response is always far bigger and quicker than the fight. So that's always there. That's always been there. But this, I guess the point is, are we getting that much more so nowadays because of availability of information, transparency, social media, the whole stuff that we've been talking about? Where our negativity is becoming really the 24-hour news that we see, and everything is deluging us with bad news or apparently bad news. We don't see any of the good news. Our communities are fractured, local communities are fractured, so we don't keep on running into the people who actually are very friendly. As Helen said, people are good, people do nice things to each other, but somehow we've got this image being created in our minds that the world out there is nasty and people are out for their own good, and it's bad and it's awful and it's corrupt and it's greedy and all of the rest. And I think we just got to be very careful not to reinforce that, but actually to push back against it, because that's not the case. And we're not living in that world. This is a virtual world, an artificial world. This is a world that we are creating ourselves in our mind. Okay, David, there may be bad actors trying to encourage it, but this is, it's our mind. We have to fight back against that cynicism and negativity. That would be my take on that story, I have to say.
But you can have a bad day, Charles. I mean, let's say that Alan, having loved LinkedIn, loved the LinkedIn post about the cats, realized that it was AI, then returned to his PC and had an email from someone saying that his car needed to be taxed from the DVLA, which is a scam email. But they somehow know the month you're trying to tax your car. And then, you go from pillar to post, don't you? By having to invent an additional process, which is to say, is this real?
Yeah.
And so you can have a really so bad social media day. At the end of it, you think, bloody hell, I've seen two things that I thought were true. I rang up one of my mates to say, have you heard about this? And he told his AI. I then went to my PC. Someone told me I'd inherited £2 million. Then someone tried to con me out of some other money because they knew somehow when the month my car was due to be taxed. And so it goes on. So there do need to be some ways in which that cynicism and the sort of state of distress on the left-hand side of the brain that David's been talking about is got to be calmed down somehow. But if you have a bad day, you have a bad day, it's going to be very
into the next section, I think, actually, Neil, because
maybe
we need to find ways to contract that before we go. Chris, yeah.
Oh, someone else put their hand up first, but I'm actually in my research, I'm working on answering that question. How do you help people detect nonsense? And there's a mindset, there's a skill set. So there's hope.
Echoes what Adrian was saying about teaching in schools now, beginning to echo that too, which is certainly true. Shall we move on to the next section, do you think?
Yes, Neil, let's
yeah, well, I mean, it's just a very basic question. What can we do about it? I mean, listening to the conversation we've had, where are we all in terms of trying to come to a rational both left and right-handed brain decision on whether there is an issue, and if there is an issue, how big an issue is it now? And also going forward, obviously, Chris has come up with one solution, which is his new book, How Do You Help People Detect Nonsense? So, I mean, it seems to me that the number one, that's going to be an absolute bestseller, Chris.
Ought to be.
So I think, just going back to what I said in the beginning, I think it is worth just considering this on a macro and a micro level. And I'm just really going back to, for example, bad behavior on a bus or a train, which also links to what Charles was saying at the beginning about whether standards of behavior have changed. And I suppose when we are out and about in relation to living our values, the way that we react to people where we see bad behavior being displayed I would say, is something that has changed substantially over the past, let's say, 30 years, particularly this whole concept of whether you get involved in a situation that emerges as you go about your daily business. So I think when we think about what we can do about the issues that are emerging from our discussion, looking at it on a micro level is important, and then obviously looking on a macro level as well. Do we intervene, for example, if we see someone go into Sainsbury's and grab a couple of bottles of, whiskey or detergent, whatever, shove it in their pocket and then just walk out the store? Do we get involved if we see someone on public transport being abusive to someone? We just had I live in quite a small village in Kent, and we just had a major incident with some youths using pea shooters to attack an old person, which has caused an absolute scandal in the village in terms of the fact that that person has ended up in hospital. So I think looking at this in terms of what we can do about it, I think it's worth looking at a micro level, whether we're looking at a whole series of things at a micro level that could then build up into something more substantive. Clearly, one of the things on a macro level we can consider is the actual democratic process that we have, the power we have, and whether that is fit for purpose. And I suppose the other thing I would say is the question, do we actually want to do anything about it? Or are we at the point where we are a passive passenger that simply makes comment and are quite happy to leave it at that? So I'm very happy to open the floor to anyone in terms of what I've said, what we've heard this morning, and also ultimately when this session ends, we go make a cup of tea and we go out there and to our next meeting and our next interaction with other members of the human race.
I think the point you're making is very valid. If I look widespread, I think with all the things we talked about earlier, overload and for all the multiplicative reasons, there's quite a level of apathy now. So there's, people see things, but they're not acting. They might comment, but they don't act. And interestingly, I think I saw some evidence that says the more people comment, the less likely they are to act. So getting people to comment, actually those people are actually less likely to take action. So again, that's driving the wrong behaviours and building more apathy, more comment than act. And I think one of the things we need to do is move, and we're starting to do a bit of work on this, to build a cross-generational movement who are focused on purposeful action. Bring the people who are not interested in just commenting, but the people who want to take purposeful action together. So they're collaborating together. And that can start to create more of a movement, because when some people start to see action, then more people see the value of action being taken and will join in. So there won't be an early adopter, but we need to bring the early adopters that really want to apply purposeful action to change things for the better and bring them together and collaborate and align and to help each other to do that. And then we can move into the people that will just sit on the fence until they see things start to make a difference. And then you enter a hope action wheel, if that makes sense, because it's an interesting one, because people say, well, we need hope. But then again, what creates hope? Does hope create action, or does action create hope? And in reality, I believe it's a self-reinforcing wheel in a positive way and a negative way. So we've got to start to build that. So if people do not have hope, then they don't take action, and that reinforces that nothing will change. Does that make sense? Whereas if you start a positive cycle, then the people that do have hope and they do take action, that leads to more hope, because they can see the impact action is then having. So I think we've probably got to think about, and I'm starting to do a little bit of work on building cross-generational movements, Gen A, generation focused on alignment and action. And also that is one of a dozen sub-movements that I call under Gen P, which is about purpose, people, place and planning. People that want to come together to fix those things and collaborate to do that. And sub-movements will come. Sub-movements will come that want to volunteer, and other sub-movements will come that want to take action, aligned action. So not random action, but coming together to aligned action. And then, of course, then that grows the power of people. So that's the reason, because that people, the only thing to balance the power and the money dynamics and the way technology is going is to bring that people power and cross-generational movement to people power. So that's one of the things that obviously I'm interested in helping develop. And, you know, if you want to find out more, then more than happy to explain.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a good approach, David. And I'm good. But Chris was trying to say something. Chris,
well, I think those are great points, and I was thinking to add to that slightly is that you definitely need ground level doers, and there's an art to that, but actually change is really hard, and if you don't have support from the top, that makes it more effective if only you can find it, right? If you can't find it, then the only option is from the ground. But actually, if you have something led from the top that has doers involved, then that maybe is the best of all worlds. And maybe that's the question: is how can we motivate leaders to take chance like that, which is very hard. But
just to reinforce that, I fully agree. And so we're building the two together. We're building this cross-generational movement on the ground, but we're also building personal governance, and they join together. So it's top down and bottom up. So what you said, fully agree with, and both are necessary. You can do it bottom up, but it's very, very difficult. It's a lot easier if you've got personal governance built in with good values right at the top, driving it, because that will accelerate the change rather than try to stifle the change.
You can never do it top down.
No, exactly. You need both. And world-class companies do both. You know, they don't do one or the other. They do both, and they integrate them, which is what personal governance is about, linking to those cross-generational movements.
I mean, a lot of it is it may not be bottom up entirely, but the issue with values in public life is to do with leadership, isn't it? And whether the leadership have our trust or not. If they don't have, if their behaviour isn't aligned with what we think what they say their values is, let alone what we think their values should be, then we're not going to trust them. So the example of our leaders is very important, but the example of all of us is very important, isn't it? So if we don't act, just going back to that point about action and change, if we don't act, we're not going to affect any change. What I was going to add, though, is that a lot of it is to do with our perception, really, isn't it? This is what we touched on a few times earlier. I don't think the human race has really changed that much. Human nature has changed that much. I think it's highly unlikely. But I think what has happened is that circumstances have certainly changed. We have access to this amazing overload of information, and we are overloaded. So we're living in a different world. But the underlying human nature, I think, hasn't necessarily changed that much. But I think what has happened is that because we're getting all this information, and much of it, most of it, almost all of it, frankly, is negative, our perceptions are inevitably really badly coloured by that. And we see the world darkly, we see through a glass darkly, and that's affecting our actions, and that's why we don't act. That's why it's all so difficult. And that's why cynicism about politicians, people in public life, is so dangerous too, because that reinforces. I mean, I'm not saying they're not effective. They're probably thinking the same way as us. They're representing us in many ways, not just getting our votes, but they are people like us. So they are affected by the same cynicism and negativity that the rest of us are affecting, but they're reinforcing it by their actions. And I think that if we're looking for the way forward, I would say it's got to be to do with addressing perception. And I mean, that's what a lot of us have been trying to do. We're trying to tell people, look, your views on other people are just damn wrong. You know, the research shows that people aren't bad, that people have, you know, as we say so many times, people have these good values. The research shows it over and over again, or they aspire to have the good values. And the research also shows, as we all know, that, you know, one of the main reasons they didn't put that into action is because they think that other people don't have them too. And it just seems to me this is the nothing new. I'm not saying we've all been, aware of this and acting on it for years. But this remains the one, for me, the one big fact, to overturn that narrative, that perception that it's all bad, which is being reinforced more and more by all the other stuff we've been talking about.
So, Charles, just on a practical basis, would you support, for example, legislation that enforced media organizations to have a minimum content of 25%, let's say, of positive news?
I've not seen anyone suggesting that. I don't know how.
No. I was thinking about it as you were talking.
In
Isn't that something that you could say you need some balance here, because we have the evidence that we're all being stressed out. We have gone away from the rationality of decision making, which is the point Chris is making, and we need to rebalance that. So, this is about protecting human brains. This is what we're going to do.
If you could do that, I'm not clear whether you could.
Come on.
Yeah. And also I'd say to make illegal the addiction practice, locking us onto the things that aren't good, because that's where the money and effort's going. So having some challenge of the deliberate process of making the negative perception story tied to an addiction practice, tied to addiction technologies. Try to outlaw that in some way, stop it. And I think your point about the perception is a good one, because as I say, with the Hope Action Wheel, that purely is on your perception. If you've got a good perception, you'll think hope makes a difference, so I'll take action, and that action will make a difference. Whereas if you're being driven into a negative perception, you're on a negative cycle, feeling hopeless and never planning to take any action because you don't think it makes a difference. So the perception point's very, very important. And I think it's the way you go around the wheel. Is it a positive way around the wheel or a negative way around the wheel? And I think we're being driven into the negative way around the wheel. So things that stop that would be very, very helpful. And again, I say challenging technology, because I believe the technology companies, they realise discourse anger and eyeballs is related to the negative view. So that's why they're driving that one and making people addicted to it. And
I think,
sorry, go on.
sorry to interrupt, David, just to respond to what Neil says, and I'm conscious that time is moving on a bit. If you could legislate, fine, but I just think we can't rely on somebody else doing something about it. We actually have to take responsibility, which is, I think, the other plank of what I'd say. And we have to learn to take responsibility for the world in which we live. I think young people are inclined to do that. I think, well, all of us are inclined to do that, but those inclinations are often overwhelmed by, well, all sorts of, psychological, internal and external forces. But that's, I think, what is it missing in the modern world? I don't know, but it's certainly important, as opposed to the world that we inherited from our parents and grandparents. I don't know how much has changed, but I do think we need to assume responsibility. And I think we have less of a sense of responsibility than we used to. So I think it comes down to personal. I think also to education would be the other big thing I mentioned, which Adrian was talking about earlier.
There's also something about things never really working when they're done starting from a place of being official. Whether it's external rules and regulations, because then people just play the game. It has to come from the inside and with strong values-led leadership. And I was a judge on a panel recently, and it was a rowing club, and they're on the Thames in a pretty disadvantaged area. And the guy was saying, I just love it when I look at the kids and they're scared stiff to hand their phone over to somebody as they're getting into this 8. And then they get in the boat and they're told, if you don't do what you're told, everybody's going to be capsized. And he was just saying how good it is for them when they're pushed off from the shore and they know they're all dependent on each other. They haven't got their phones. And that's not about rules and legislation. That's just about having infrastructure and systems where people can learn the right things.
Powerful metaphor, that, isn't it? It really is, that whole image.
But part of that is self-reliance, isn't it? knowing that you've got to do your part and that you are part of a team, and you've got to be self-reliant on, you know, being able to make the right rational decisions, actually, going back again to what Chris is saying, in a situation where you've got to become and really get in sync with the other rowers. You've got to be acutely aware of where you are.
And it's not about who is the best rower on the boat.
Absolutely. But this whole thing about self-reliance is then linked to self-confidence and knowing what you want and knowing actually when you've reached the point where you've got sufficient information to make an informed decision. And I think that's part of the thing that social media does, is it can extend that process so that it can lead to greater prevarication, I would say, in my experience.
I think what's needed, what's so much needed, I think, as part of education at every level are the life skills of, you know, perception, discernment, resilience, resourcefulness. These are some of the things that have just been touched in these recent contributions from each one of you. These life skills need to be highlighted, I feel. I think what we're noticing everywhere is an increase in mental health problems. I'm on a board here in Jersey for eating disorder support. And it's quite frightening, actually, how that particular ailment, whatever you call it, disorder, has been on the increase recently. And it seems to be that, you know, people just are losing those coping skills, that resilience, that and are just falling into this addictive behavior and just losing control. So, of course, this links very closely with values, but sort of values linked with life skills and sort of inner resources that are so needed to cope with what's going on in the world. And I think that needs to start at an early age. I don't know whether, as a group, you know, we can encourage more of this sort of thing to go on in education.
Well, I think we can encourage, because we've reached the part of this conversation where we really need to bring together what we've heard, excuse me, to make a plan, I guess a personal plan, to see if, as a result of what we do, and perhaps triggered in a small way by this conversation, what we can do to make a difference. And that would be a good closing part, so that we have, even if it's a single action, a mini action plan for us to go when this meeting finishes. So I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that, or wants to reflect on something they've heard today, which has landed well. Can I open that up to everyone?
I'll have a first go, if you like, just while everyone thinks. What I think is very important, leading really directly on from what everyone's been saying just now, is that we need to act, yes, but acting alone is really, really hard work. If you're right in saying, if you haven't got the top down, the bottom up is really hard. The bottom up is really hard if you're just trying to do something yourself. So I'd say the emphasis should be on really forging new or interlocking communities. I think, David, you were talking about that earlier with what you're doing, and I think we're all involved in doing that, actually. But that, it seems to me, that's absolutely the way to go. We need to have communities that are pushing back against all this, that are, you know, talking about the values, that are trying to overcome the negativity, trying to overthrow the sort of false perceptions and the tendency towards groupthink, all the skills that Helen was talking about. So I'd say forging new positive communities and linking those communities together more and more until we've got some sort of movement, which I think is slowly happening. There's such a lot happening. I mean, every day I expect all of you are coming across new communities, new networks, new movements, new initiatives. There are just so many, and I think this is part of the reaction to what we've all been seeing, the subject we've all been talking about. And that's what people are doing. I think it's absolutely the right thing to do. And the next step is to link them all together and as much as we can and try and get, joint positive actions. We can have an effect. I mean, we vote for the damn people that are representing us in Parliament. And, they have to take notice. But there are other things we can do as well, other than just vote, of course.
Charles, you reminded me of when we met back in the day with St. Ethelbert is doing exactly that, trying to build communities. And one of the things actually we learned from that work is that you need to support the other people trying to make change. So that is really important. And I think the other thing that comes to mind is trying to be positive, but also sharing stories of success that people can learn from. Like little things really matter, perhaps.
People take note of example, and there are people doing things. You can write all you want. I mean, I'm not saying you shouldn't write a book, but people really are moved by what they see around them, people they see doing things. Really, that's very, very powerful.
Yes, David.
Just adding on what's already been said, which I fully agree with, is coming back to this idea of trust. Actually, there's more trust in our local communities and neighbourhoods than there is in national government. So my perspective is that that a lot of these things will start to centre around place, localities, neighbourhoods, communities. They'll be the ones that show how to do this and do this better. And then people will start to see that and grow more. And now I can already see initiatives that are doing exactly that, which are really positive and starting to get a positive message out. So I think there's an element of, yes, there's not much trust at the central government level, but there's actually quite a lot of trust in communities that are there, that when people start to act in an organised way, that draws other people in. So this hope action cycles can start to become very positive and actually start to take meaningful actions that impact those communities and draw more people in. So I think maybe the embryos will start, as you're really referring to, not just in groups trying to do different things, but also place-based activities where alignment comes through place as well, not just us aligning communities that are trying to do great things, but also that coming together in places.
Building on that, David, coming back to this point about the importance of infrastructure. So I'm involved with a kindness initiative at the moment, but what we're not doing is trying to set up another kindness movement. Instead, what we're doing is creating a conducive environment for the existing players to be able to connect with each other, collaborate, and create more positive impact. So I'm just thinking about this, your point about local communities. Imagine if there was an infrastructure that prevented them having to all reinvent the wheel and benefit from what everybody else had been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Great idea. Yeah. The key thing is we do not want to reinvent the wheel. It's about bringing things together and creating a foundation where things can do that is absolutely the right thing to do. Yeah, so fully agree.
I mean, that's a bit like what the UK Values Alliance tries to do.
Brilliant.
Any more questions? We've got a couple of minutes. Anyone else would like to say anything? Either on the experience of this chat or...
Chris is saying something, but he's on mute.
I just love Alan's bookshelf behind him. He doesn't even have to talk. His values. It's brilliant.
Have you noticed when he keeps on, as years go by, he keeps on shifting that one way, towards when I'm looking at it, because there's more and more books he needs to fit in behind him. He's going to disappear off the screen entirely in a year or two's time.
I think I'll just stick to my one plant. I found the conversation very enriching. Thank you very much for including me in this discussion. It's really been wonderful. It's touched a lot of chords here and there, and I'm sure a lot will come of it in many different ways.
Adrian, did you have any reflections at all?
No.
Okay.
Because I'm watching the clock as well. So
okay, no worries. But thank you very much. We're sort of there time-wise. So thank you very much for participating. I hope the format conversation styles worked. We covered quite a lot of ground. Um, I think the main thing that's come out for me is what Charles said about this connectivity, which was then endorsed by the example Alan gave about the kindness initiative, not trying to set up another one, but creating the connections that can make those that are already working that space more efficient and more powerful. So that's been quite good for me. Any final thoughts from anyone else before we close?
I just say that I find these sort of discussions personally very energizing too, because, and I think that's one very, very important, because we're all working in the space in one way or another and trying to do something along the lines we've been talking about. And it sometimes it's sort of disheartening, and you think, my goodness, what are any of us changing? But actually, we are slowly changing. I think there is an opportunity to change, but we do need energy. We need to join together and inspire each other. I think that's really one of the big values of a session like this, really, for me.
Have a good weekend, everybody.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone.